Alright, so I'll repeat my message. So, for example, when sometimes non-Muslims approach you, or Muslims with weak iman, and they ask you on topics, for example, one topic could be the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his marriage with Aisha, and then they may mention facts such as the age, or something along the lines of that. So, what do you believe is the best way to give them an answer on a topic such as that?
Alright, okay. So, if a non-Muslim was to ask you that?
Yeah, or even a Muslim with weak iman.
Okay, so what would their main objection be? What would you say would be their main objection?
Just the age of Aisha in that circumstance.
The age of Aisha. Okay, so what was that age?
That's people have disputes amongst that. Some go from like 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 or...
Okay. So the hadith in Bukhari obviously mentions that the age of Aisha radiallahu anha herself mentions that her age was 9 when the marriage was consummated. So is that too young?
No.
Okay, so according to you it's not too young.
It's too young.
It's too young?
Yeah.
Okay. I said is it too young?
According to what?
Societal norms, yes.
Societal norms.
Okay, so according to our society norms it's too young. So it's something which, I mean, if somebody said that to you, that a 53 or 54-year-old person, you know, consummated a marriage with a 9-year-old, that would generally cause problems. So now this is what in the hadith of Bukhari, this is what we have. So basically what you're trying to say is that generally a 9-year-old would, if you were to describe a 9-year-old as of that age, that would always be a child. Yeah, you'd agree with that?
Yeah.
So a 9-year-old is always a child, isn't it?
No. It depends on the definition of a child.
Okay.
It depends on the environment they grow up in.
Okay.
And the level of maturity for this same individual.
Okay, mashallah. Those are very good answers. So that answers the question. So, however, in essence, if somebody was asking you that question, yeah, then the only issue that they would have, because this is what we're trying to get at, if somebody was to ask you that question, how would you reply? So now the only issue they would have is the fact that Aisha radiallahu anha is a child. Yeah? Is there anything else apart from that?
The question is like, what's wrong with marrying a young person?
Okay, so yeah, so that's the issue, isn't it? Okay, so that's the main question. Okay.
You have to see with the biological implications and the mental implications, like is that person biologically grown up or mentally grown up? If that is, then age doesn't matter. Like for some people, even when they are like 21, they are more than a child.
Okay, shouldn't. Yeah, so this is very thing. So while we're talking about this, we're not going to try and talk. I'm not going to give too many references or use long words. There's just not much point. So we'll keep it very simple. And most of the things that I say will be accepted truths. Most people will accept what I'm saying to be, generally you could Google it and you could just find out. So I won't try and give too many references, but we'll just give a very basic, way to explain that kind of question. And what you just said, so adulthood generally, in this country is based on what? How old is an adult? If you wanted to consummate a marriage, you'd be 16, yeah, with parents' permission. So in this country it's 16, yeah, and that's when you're allowed to give consent to have a relationship with somebody else. And if you're below that age, you're not allowed to give that consent. So they've decided it by number. So now generally the societal norm, as you're talking about, is 16. So that's what everyone accepts. So now if you bring that down to 9, people have a problem. That generally in this country we believe that show me a 9-year-old who you think is capable of doing that. And people say these kind of things. So this is the problem. But now generally, as we've just proven, that people in this country, they've given the number 16 for the age of somebody being capable of consenting for having that kind of relationship. But generally, as we know, adulthood isn't. If you were to look at that difference between a person who's a child and then he goes up to be an adult. So what's the difference between a child and an adult? Like what causes that difference between somebody who's still a child and actually an adult? Is it everyone that becomes 16 suddenly becomes an adult? Is that puberty? Yeah. So puberty, generally, even if you were to look in a dictionary, in most dictionaries, they would give 1 or 2 definitions. So the first definition would be puberty. Somebody who's hit physical puberty. The body changes in certain ways. That's number 1. And the second thing is mental and psychological. So there's 2 ways. There's 2 key things that you have to focus on. So now most dictionaries will give these 2 definitions. So these 2 things make up adulthood. Yeah. So when somebody hits puberty physically and psychologically, they become mature. So psychologically, they can now make this decision that this is the right relationship to have, or this is the right thing to do. So this is one of the key things that we have to get through. And this transition from being a child to an adult is affected in so many different ways. Very often by the culture and the way that a person is brought up, the social environment a person is brought up in, and also the experiences which a person has even before he reaches that age. So while a person is reaching that age, the experiences which he has, they also affect the age at which a person would go through these changes. So the two changes, the mental change and the biological change. After a person's gone through this change, then a person is happily, everyone's happy that this person can now be an adult and a person can consent to whatever he wants. I mean, in history, this has never been a number. This is one of the most important. I mean, it was in the news just a couple of days ago, on the 6th of March, 2 days ago, that in France they've made if somebody who's over 15 and has a relationship with somebody who's under 15, then that automatically is rape, but by default. So that was the law which changed. It was in the news a couple of days ago. Literally on Tuesday, that was in the news. So now, just because we live in the UK and we have 16 as our youngest age, as our age of consent, we don't go around to France saying, how dare they, oppress every single 15-year-old in that country who can give consent because they're treated like an adult. I mean, we don't go on imposing that. So this is the key thing, that because we've grown up in a certain way, understanding the age of somebody giving consent in a certain way, it doesn't mean that we can now impose our understanding on the whole of history from the beginning of time. Because maturity and adulthood is always more than a biological number. We can't limit it just to being that number. So 16 may be in this country what we perceive to be the right number, but in other countries it may be higher, it may be lower, and depending on the environmental circumstances, that will change. So this is something which affects the way that a person he perceives the age of somebody who's appropriate for to get married. And generally, to understand this, it's very simple really. The concept's very simple. It doesn't take a lot of explaining. But unfortunately, a lot of people, they just don't want to understand it. They don't want to appreciate this. So now, if you were to think that all you got to do is remove your biased lens. So the way we've grown up thinking of 9-year-olds in a certain way, because that's the only 9-year-old we've seen. We haven't seen any other type of 9-year-old. But in different parts of the world and in different times in history, 9-year-olds were very different, whether we like that or not. And that's something which, if you look at it anthropologically, then, so this would be the best science to understand this, because they study, the whole subject is about studying humans in different societies from beginning in different places. So now if we'll use their knowledge and their expertise to fully understand how the age of Aisha radiallahu anha was so low and how that was acceptable in that time, and why even today we believe that for that time was acceptable, and we don't believe that there was really anything wrong with that. And there's one specific reference which I want to give. I did say I'm not going to give any references, but there's one book which is written by Mary Lewis, and it's the bioarchaeology of students, the bioarchaeology of children. And in there she mentions one key point, which we can quote word for word, that we can't transpose our views of adulthood onto the past, as it's always a lot more than a biological number. And this is literally what she writes in her book. And it's a very, very important point, that this is what, whenever somebody brings this up as an issue, that why was she so young, what they're doing is they're saying that my understanding of what a 9-year-old or what age a person is suitable for doing certain things should be imposed on the whole of history from the beginning of time. And that's just something which doesn't make sense, because people have changed, and especially when people believe in evolution, they by default they believe that people have changed over time. And even we know, even as Muslims, what we believe is that the way people react to certain circumstances and environmental conditions, that also changes over time. So that's one of the things. And even if you look in the West, in Europe and America, especially in America, America's statistics are very interesting. Again, these are things, like I said, I could give you references, but generally you can find them very easily on Google, that America, even in the 1880s, most of their states, the age of consent was 10. And one of the states, Delaware, the age of consent was 7. So and there was a few that was 12. But generally, the age of consent in 37 of the states in the 1880s was 10. So now that's in America, which is the progressive people, and even in Europe, in most places, Spain, Portugal, Denmark, these kind of countries, the age of consent in the 1800s was 10, and then in the later 1800s it was raised to 13. But generally, to have just, how long are we talking? Just over 200 years ago, that the age of consent in most of Europe where we're living was 10. So now this is something which, nowadays we couldn't imagine a 10-year-old, kind of engaging in that kind of activity. We wouldn't imagine it. So people change over time. Yeah, and the way people are, it generally changes, and we can see this pattern just from the statistics of Europe and America. So we can safely say that a certain number of years ago, in the whole world, everybody was happy with this. So that's a really, really important point. And what this also means is that if that's the age which they've set, then usually people are more than likely to achieve adulthood before that age. Yeah, it's possible for them to achieve that. It's not something necessary that you have to wait. Like today, we have got 16, so it's more than possible that somebody before 16 will achieve, puberty. So now we can say we can transpose that onto the past as well. So just because nowadays we have a different way of understanding that, people would have become mature before that age as well. So people would become adult at a much younger age than that, and this is something which we understand. And so that's one of the key points that we understand. But nowadays we've got 16 as our threshold, but even below that we can appreciate that. So now it's fair to say that just less than 250 years ago, more or less the whole world was happy with having a 10-year-old as engaging in a sexual relationship. So now this is the way that the world changed at that time. At that time people were happy with that, and then it went up to 13. Then nowadays it's 16 or 18. Now because people have changed, the biological structure of people has changed, and now this is something which people also question, which is that how is it that certain people prove that people have people actually changed, or were people in the past just wrong? Now, as we know today, nowadays scientists, they describe paedophilia as generally a psychiatric disorder. That somebody who's got paedophilia is messed up, there's something wrong with him. So now, because there's a disorder in him, that means that if we say that 200-300 years ago, everybody who was happy with this, the whole world was engaged in paedophilia, the whole world had a psychiatric disorder, it's a bit of a ludicrous claim to make that. I mean, that was the way people were. People used to mature earlier. And just to come back to the 2 points, that childhood, we said, was, the end of childhood is constituted by two things. One is a mental development, and one is a physical development as well. So now both of these things are proven even today by scientists of today to be very, very adaptable, especially in the mental department. So humans are known to be the most adaptable species mentally on the planet, because they can adapt in so many different ways. And this is, with regards to this, especially with the young children, they're very, very sensitive to the environment which they grow up in. And then if the environment is, an environment of war and of danger, which it used to be more dangerous, and there used to be more war going on at that time especially, then they'll be more likely to mature a lot quicker in order to be able to live in the moment, so to speak. So people adapt very quickly, and that's mentally. And biologically, as in physically, even then we notice that it's almost like we today in 2018, we're claiming that we know better about the way that people were 1400 years ago than the people who were 1400 years ago knew about themselves. It's almost like we're claiming we know when their children matured more than they did. I mean, they were perfectly capable of identifying when the child has matured and knowing that it's now ready for marriage. It's not something that we have to come along and now police that so many years later. They were capable, and we wouldn't expect people to transpose that kind of view. Otherwise, the accusation is a very, very ludicrous accusation to kind of make. So this is one of the key things which, and even scientifically, physically a person changes. So mentally a person changes as well, but even physically, a person, when the environment of that area is very, very dangerous, or the situation is always changing and there's no consistency there, then in that kind of environment, a person by default, they will mature a lot quicker, physically and biologically, both ways. So this is I hope that answers the question, Sheikh Hassan. Does it?
No.
Okay, is there anything else that doesn't make sense about that, or there's any further questions about that? Inshallah, you can.
I was going to go back to the thing about Tawbah. For example, use the example of backbiting, and you said about the element of seeking forgiveness from others as well. But in certain situations, like, would it not be more advisable not to tell the person that you spoke about behind their back, as it's going to make them more upset than they were.
Sorry, yeah. I didn't explain this today. Okay, so brother asked the same question, very similar. So basically, the condition is if the person, so that's why the glasses were there. Right. So if he done it stealthily, and he didn't realize it was him, so now he doesn't know who's stolen his glasses. But now he's taken possession. He's robbed him of something quite important. So now it's necessary for him to now repay him with those glasses. Does that make sense? In whatever way, he doesn't have to tell him that I stole your glasses. Here's your glasses back. But in some way, he has to try and recompense him. However, if he doesn't do it stealthily enough, and he gets caught, and he knows it's him, and then he runs off.
Someone else tells me. Okay,
then in that case, then obviously it doesn't make much sense for him to pretend that he doesn't know. So obviously because he knows, then he'll go to him and ask him forgiveness. So I hope that kind of, so backbiting most of the time the person won't know. So again, if it's going to cause a bigger problem if you go and tell him, and it's going to cause more friction in society. Obviously Islam, it comes to unite everyone. So if it's going to cause more friction, then you try in some way to make that up to him. So you try and one of the best ways is to speak good about that person. So if you say something bad, you say something good, and obviously you try and overcompensate just to be on the safe side as well.
And if that's not possible either, then you just directly ask Allah for forgiveness, right?
No, you do both, innit?
I mean, like for example, let's say you don't want to address them, and you can't recompensate them in any way because you may not be around them or something like that. The best solution would be to
so you'd have to do that anyway.
Irrespective.
So irrespectively, mashallah, brilliant wording, you'll have to do both.
So with backbiting, so I take the opinion that obviously if you backbite anyone, it's bad, right? But someone recently said that like if you backbite a non-Muslim, it's okay to backbite a non-Muslim, like apparently. I don't agree with this, but this is what they said, and I just want I wanted to know.
It causes the same problem, especially when you're living in university. I mean, because you got to look at the holistic picture of Islam. The reason they're saying that is because the hadith mentions ذِكْرُكَ أَخَاكَ, that you mention your brother specifically, as in brother or sister. It means that a Muslim person. But what you got to consider is that was in Medina where everybody was Muslim. So now the aim of Muslims and Islam is to live in harmony with everyone and to try and unite everyone to achieve. Now this is why the Sahaba achieved so much, because they had so much love with one another. So now even living in university, for example, having to get on with non-Muslims is a part of it, isn't it? You can't just live here without getting on with them. So now all of these, what we call adabul mu'ashara, the etiquettes of social life, they apply to generically to everyone. You have to have if you treat Muslims with a smile and you don't smile at non-Muslims, all of that becomes a da'wah. The way that Muslims present themselves and the way that Muslims interact and kind of integrate in society, and the way they manage to give a good message and be united within themselves, but also ultimately our aim is to be a force for good throughout. We don't just want ISOC to do good, we want the whole of the University of Essex to be a force for good throughout the world, and that will mean that we'll have to have those kind of people on our side. And Gheebah generically causes problems in society. Now even if a Muslim brother has done Gheebah of another non-Muslim and then he finds out, or he doesn't find out, but that saying something bad about him will cause friction between the people. So generically it's not a good thing, it's just as bad really.
Will the consequence be the same if you were to speak about a Muslim or a non-Muslim?
That's too deep, man.
Okay.
You got to think of it as bad, innit? Yeah. They're both Gheebah. The thing is, when Allah speaks about Gheebah in the Quran, one of the reasons scholars mention is because of the effect it has in society, the detrimental effect it has in society. And if you're talking about non-Muslim, it's going to have the same detrimental effect. The only reason you can't say I can't say yes to your question is because there's a bit of discrepancy in the hadith.
Some acts are bad, by themselves, like the act itself is bad, irrespective of the context, irrespective of the situation.
Absolutely, yeah.
But for example, it doesn't. So, if first of all, like these kind of bad actions, for example, like backbiting or spying on someone, peeping on someone, these are bad, irrespective of that person, whoever that person is, or whatever kind of situation you are.
Definitely, yeah.
But then there are some people who confuse that there are certain situations when some actions they are not bad as of
themselves, yeah.
as of themselves, but they just become bad because
In relation
in
to
relation to the situation.
Absolutely, yeah, that's true. So yeah, anything else? Turn it off then.
Jazakallah.
You pressed the off button.
This one.